Welcome to this week's news report. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. For this week's news program, I have with me Mr. Joseph Waters, who is a regular reporter on these programs. Thank you, Mr. Waters, for being here.
Well, Mayor, thanks for inviting me again.
Yes. Well, we have a number of topics that we are going to cover today that are follow-up reports on issues that we've reported on in the past. The first topic involves the Maplewood Mall and the study that was completed by the City of Maplewood and their North End work group. They put together some recommendations, and we've reviewed these recommendations on these programs in the past and done an analysis of those. We've also done programs for this program where we've looked at some of the trends for malls nationwide. And Mr. Waters was on a report where we looked at the growing trend of using retail space and converting it to commercial space that's used for distribution warehouses and the changes in that particular market. So today we're going to continue with that report, and also that Maplewood received an award and whether or not we think this award is well placed or not. So Mr. Waters, first, before we get started, any comments that you want to make with regard to the North End Study work group or the trends in malls?
Not really. I think what we've kind of explained it in past episodes, and I just want to say I think the city's focus is misplaced, and I think it's our responsibility or our obligation to kind of point out, like, hey, this is what's really going on versus what you want, because you need to look long term, not short term. And if I have a problem with the city trying to destroy what I consider destroying its economic base for basically a short-term problem.
Right. And another thing that I want to point out as we get to it is that the council members that we currently have on the Maplewood City Council, they should have the background to ask the relevant questions, and yet they don't ask the relevant questions when this proposal and these recommendations came before them. They just got out their big red stamps and rubber stamped it.
Right. I think basically, in some ways I don't blame staff, in other ways I do blame staff. Staff is doing what the council is directing them to do. And like you said, you have council members that really don't understand what is going on. It's nice to have a big vision that you want to solve the world's problems, but sometimes in order to solve the world's problems, you got to understand where you're going, where you've been, where you're going, and what's out there, and what's in the best interest long term, not just what looks good today so that you can get reelected next week.
Yes, and in Maplewood there will be an election next fall.
Exactly. And
there will be 4 of the 5 seats up for election. So it's going to be a banner year for elections in Maplewood. Well, let's get started with our first clip, and this is something from our archives that we have looked at over the past couple of months. These are clips from the work group study recommendations as to their vision as to how the Maplewood Mall area should be re-guided for development or redevelopment. Let's take a look.
The near-term sort of recommendations that we identified. A real big key focal point of this, I think, is this idea that there's a new thoroughfare that would connect the St. John's Hospital on the west end of the North End, and then with the mall on the east end of the North End. And that was really seen as something that, if we could imagine that being kind of a new spine upon which development over time can kind of grow off of, and it just serves to sort of connect and help establish new synergies among hospital workers that might want to get to the mall and so forth and back and forth.
He mentions this new thoroughfare and how that could potentially be the spine from which new development could evolve, and that it will create synergies. And these are all just glowing words that you can get out of a textbook for redevelopment. This is not necessarily what's could happen in this area based upon just putting that thoroughfare there, because as we will see, the type of development that they're looking to guide this land for is not commercial development. So how can you say you're going to have commercial development grow if you haven't guided it for that in your recommendations? And we'll get to that long-term study and we'll see that. So now, Mr. Waters, we should point out to our viewers that if we look at this clip, it's all commercial retail with maybe some office space in those strip malls. But in this near-term plan that he's showing, the yellow is residential. The red is retail. So we've now taken a predominantly retail area and converted it to residential.
Yeah.
Mr. Waters, what do you think that does to the tax base?
So it's going to substantially drop the tax base. You know, you're not going to have the dollars there to fund basic services. Now, I understand retail has changed and you want to reduce its footprint. I can understand that. But suddenly bringing people in with no strong economic base to support that, you're just basically going to have another collapse in a few years, assuming that it even gets filled at all.
Right. And here's the other thing, if we look at that short-term plan, you see that aqua blue area, that is where the city thinks that they can entice a developer to put a hotel. And as Mr. Mike Martin, who is a planner developer at the city of Maplewood, indicated, the reason the city staff of Maplewood believes that this is the case is because it's right next to St. John's Hospital. And the city staff believes that this hotel will serve those people who have friends and loved ones staying overnight at St. John's Hospital.
Okay, I'm going to interject here on that one point, because to me, you're acting like this is a Hennepin Healthcare or a Regions Hospital, or even to the greater extent, a Mayo Clinic, where they're coming in for specialty services. Right now, I don't see St. John's, I don't see this hotel working because I don't see St. John's as a specialty hotel or a specialty hospital. Where you have friends and family staying overnight, it's because they need some sort of special services. That's where your Mayo clinics come in, your Cleveland clinics out of Cleveland, Ohio come in. That's when you get people staying overnight. This is more of a local hospital. So people tend to live in the area or close by. So it's highly unlikely that they're going to stay overnight.
And I believe that the majority of all of the patients who are at St. John's Hospital, they have their friends and family who are interested in them living within probably a half an hour away.
Go ahead.
So why would their family stay overnight at the hotel when they can just drive home within 15 minutes and stay home, get a fresh meal out of the refrigerator?
And not to mention, and this is a trend that's been going on for a number of years, they just built a day surgery center on Hazelwood, just north of Beam. So generally, you check in at say 6 in the morning, and you're probably gone by 10, because day surgery, the idea is to do the surgery, stick around for recovery, and you go home and recuperate. You don't stay overnight. So again, it's based on old model thinking.
Right, and that brings me to that observation that our council members, they have that background to be able to ask about the trends, to ask about what are the practical ramifications of these recommendations. For instance, appointed council member William Knutson, he was the administrator of St. John's Hospital back in the 70s. Or was it the 80s? One or the other. And so certainly he should be aware of hospital trends. And he certainly knows the hospital trends back when he was the administrator of St. John's Hospital. But since that was a field that he was in, you would think that he would still remain interested in that field and that he somewhat keeps up to date on the current trends. And some of those current trends is that more and more of the surgeries are done at these ambulatory surgery centers, as you indicated, that people check in the morning, they check out at the end of the day, and they go home.
You know, the other thing too, and as I'm sitting here listening to you, when you build a hotel, you don't want your customer base to be solely, you don't want 90% of your customers coming from basically one place. Usually the general rule is in business, and I'm sure you know this being in business for yourself, is you want any customer to be no more than 10% of your business. So if you're relying on 90 to 100% of your business coming from a healthcare facility, your hotel, I guarantee, will not survive. Hotels have a tough enough time as it is, given all the today's challenges that hotels have to deal with. And now they're relying on 100% of the revenue from one customer. They won't be around very long.
Right, and there's also not the same type of visibility in this location as there would be if the hotel were located more at the intersection of 694 and White Bear Avenue.
For what could be a eventual build out based on all of those principles and goals that we identified throughout this process. So we have some, we created some, nice imagery to really help people maybe visualize how some of these ideas could start to look at different perspectives.
You'll notice that they basically have lobbed off Sears. So Sears, that part of the mall, Sears is no longer in existence. That area that's on the north end of the mall looks and appears to be lobbed off as well, and that's something else. It's hard to know, maybe perhaps a parking ramp of some kind, which indicates that that's the gray area, so that's what they've converted that to, even though they've got all this parking space that they've converted to green space. So they're converting good commercial property from commercial property to parking, and they're converting parking to green space.
Yeah.
So as we look at this plan, it progressively goes down, down, down in value of that property and its best and highest use. And when, again, you look at the yellow, you can see the housing. Now the more golden yellow color, that's what they call mixed use residential, which means it's residence, but on the bottom they have little shops of some kind. So this is now that other failed model that we've seen throughout the whole entire metro, where there's the vacant retail on the bottom and then you've got your housing up above it. So boy, now this is an old concept. This is not new. This is not innovative. It's not trendy. It's not moving with the trends. It's somebody's old plan that they just pulled out of the shelf someplace and said, let's put it and sell it to Maplewood.
Yeah, see what happens. And, they're buying it for all practical purposes rather than saying, you know what, let's really, I guess I just look at this and it's like, what they really should be saying is, you know what, let's throw the model out and let's just throw stuff out there and see what is really going on, what the trends really are. Like I said, back in September, you and I did a story on how Amazon was buying up these old malls and turning them into distribution center because the land use and the infrastructure was already in place. This may work on Grand Avenue where you've got the foot traffic. I agree with you. I just don't see this concept working at all. And that northern part there, that black area, that dark gray area, that's the old Macy's. They're basically lobbed off, like you said, and turning it into a parking lot. And the other question I have is, where's Kohl's in this situation? Where's JCPenney's? Even though they're more integrated into the mall itself, but it's kind of like, where do they fit into this design, so forth.
Right, and as you look at this site plan here, there is purple, which is designated there, but there's only one block that is one little building block, little monopoly building block that's designated purple, and that's for office. So out of this whole entire commercial, retail, potentially office property, they have only designated one little segment of it as offices. So how are we going to encourage more professionals to come to Maplewood and do their officing in Maplewood if we can't even plan our future land planning to allow for offices?
Well, exactly. Plus, yeah, I'm looking at, if I'm setting up an office, the other things I'm going to look at, depending on the size of my firm, what other part of the infrastructure is there? Eateries, so forth, because they're going to want a place to eat. It's like it's like looking at St. John's when they said we'll have a thoroughfare from the mall area to the hospital, while most people that are working in the hospital are going to eat in the hospital cafeteria because they have a limited amount of time,
right?
Given the demands, the job demands, so they're not going to go very far.
Oh, they're going to have all these little scooters lined up next to the hospital so that they can all get on their little scooter and scoot over to the mall where, it's hardly in existence. Oh, gee whiz, that should be a fun destination to go to.
Yeah, not to mention having these little scooters running around when it's 14 below, and that's the high for the day.
Well, the reason that we are reviewing these recommendations and these plans is because, believe it or not, the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce gave Maplewood an award for their innovative and forward-looking plan on the Maplewood Mall area and how to guide it for the future.
We're moving on to Leaders in Local Government Award, and this is going to be Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I just want to present and give an update to the council. Last week on the 12th of September, the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce hosted their annual Leaders in Local Government Awards Luncheon. It was attended by, Mayor Abrams and some of us on staff. We were nominated, well, let me back up. So I think what's recognizable is the last time the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce was here to give an update to the council, they did talk about how they're really a chamber that represents the larger metro area. So this was an event that was amongst the awards categories and nominees, a real geographic spread of different cities within the region that have been doing work that was being recognized by the chamber. We were nominated in the category of planning, land use, and public works for the completion of our North End Vision Plan. And I'm happy to report that we are standing here tonight as the award winners in that category.
Now, he doesn't mention that the city of Maplewood actually hires the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce to help them with their business retention efforts in Maplewood. So maybe the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce is thinking that if they give Maplewood an award to help them with putting some icing on this and frosting on this work study recommendation that really is back from the 80s plan, in my opinion, that they'll be able to retain that contract with the city of Maplewood. Now, that's a great way to keep contracts, is just give your employer an award.
Yeah, of course. Of course. The Chamber of Commerce, I'm familiar with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, which includes Bloomington and the Northeast Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce. They're more concerned about land use related to how it's going to be for business and economic development versus, just some plan that was put together that was pulled out of the drawer from the 1980s. So I don't disagree with what you said there, but at the same time, you have to kind of question, or as they would say, what were you thinking?
Right. And if they are indeed charged with helping Maplewood retain business in Maplewood, why are they giving Maplewood an award which basically decimates the business land use up at the Maplewood Mall area? That to me is just counterintuitive. I just can't figure this out other than that they want to keep Maplewood happy, give them an award so that they can retain the contract for next year for the same business retention work.
Anything's possible when you lift up the hood and look at the engine.
Well, let's continue with the film footage.
You know, for the community that's here that may not be familiar, the North End Vision Plan is something that came out of our 20-year comprehensive plan to do a kind of a re-envisioning of the future of the Maplewood Mall area, recognizing that it's an area that can see a significant amount of reinvestment, and some of our community goals can be achieved in that important area of the city. So the award recognizes, just from their program, honoring those who exemplify and demonstrate innovation, excellence, and success in local government, and thank the mayor, the council, and the North End Working Group, for, as well as the Planning Commission and the boards, for all of the work that went behind the North End Vision and the success seen from the St. Paul Area Chamber. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
I just want to call out staff and Michael Martin in particular, and our residents and our business folks that showed up time and time again to work on that North End Vision Plan. It was so nice to be at that luncheon and to have our city recognized amongst, like Mr. Thompson said, a wide variety of cities of a really large, geographical area.
Now, do we think that she's running for election next fall for mayor? Right now, she's only appointed. So my guess is that now this award is going to go on her campaign card to say that she championed this whole North End Study Work Group and the recommendations and brought this award to the city of Maplewood. Yay, I can just see that on a campaign card, and it certainly sounds like she's posturing for that.
That's what it sounds like to me. And when you start to get into, when you start asking specific questions, that's where the truth will come out. But yeah, I agree with you there. It's posturing for an election coming up.
And he indicated that this was supposed to be based on reinvestment into the north end of Maplewood, the Maplewood Mall area. Well, in my mind, when you are looking to take property that is at its best and highest use, or could possibly be at a different best and highest use, like say for instance, as we discussed previously, commercial property that includes distribution centers or those types of other commercial properties, which are going for a pretty penny right now, that when you take that property that's at its best and highest use and then you downgrade it to residential and to green space, and you're getting rid of the retail, and you don't account for office space, this is not a reinvestment in the community. This is actually worse than that.
Yeah, this is someone's plan, someone's grand vision that is not what I consider market-based, based on what the real world trends are. This is someone's vision that they want to impose on a community and say, here, we think this is what's best, when in fact, every place else, like you said, it has drastically failed.
Right, and that gets right to his point where he was talking about that this also then reflects the city's goals. Well, my question is, whose goals, and what goals are those? Because certainly those goals that this supports are very different than maximizing the best and highest use for the land that you have in your community.
Well, when you ask the question, whose goals, to me, it's the council's goals. It's not the citizens' goals. Because if you were to listen to the citizens, you'd hear a completely different story.
With regard to this award, we have one last clip.
Our work recognized as being something terribly unique and wonderful, and there were lots of questions about how did you do it and what did you do and what was the result, and it really was wonderful to have staff and our residents' hard work, and our commissioners as well, recognized for the hard work that they did on the North End. So thank you very much. And it's really kind of a nice little award too. And, yeah. And where will that be?
It'll be, I think I heard today that they're planning a display here in the City Hall area for the display of the other awards that the city has received.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Yeah, I was
Joe.
going to say, when you hear, residents' comments, I'd like to hear what the residents really thought. what they really think. Yeah, you're going to get some residents that say, "Oh, yeah, this is great. This is the greatest plan on earth." But I also want to hear from the other side to see what they think and what they had proposed and how they felt the process went. How the process went.
Right. Well, you heard appointed Mayor Marley Abrams there saying that how this plan was so creative, innovative, except that, we've already had stories on these news programs over the last few years that there are some mall areas where they are toying with the idea of putting residential units in and around the mall. But that plan doesn't involve ripping down their commercial. It involves actually using underutilized parking space.
Right.
And that's the distinction here, because the stories that we have focused on where residential is going into various malls, they're using underutilized parking areas. And in this case, they're actually saying we're getting rid of the commercial and replacing it with housing.
And if you really look at it, you have quite a bit of residential development around the mall as it stands right now, the north, to the west, to the south. I mean, how much more residential do you need? And if your argument is, well, you got the bus transit center right there, well, people drive to the bus transit center parking lot and take the bus into downtown Minneapolis or into downtown St. Paul. You don't need to physically put residential property in a parking spot.
Talking about property tax revenues collected, we also don't know if all of this housing that they envision is going to be market rate and below market rate, or primarily below market rate. And the reason that makes a difference is that if you look on the Ramsey County website, under the assessor's webpage, I believe it is, there is a listing there of all the different types of property types that are taxable for property taxes in Ramsey County. And the tax rate for market rate multifamily housing is higher than for multifamily housing that is voucher housing or below market rate housing for rentals.
So in essentially, the market rate is subsidizing these other.
That's correct.
The voucher housing and so forth.
Right, that's correct. So that is another part of the calculation that you never hear this council ever talk about, is the fact that different property types bring in different revenue. And they never did, from what I understand in our reporting on this, that they never did an analysis of what, with the current property land use as it is up in this Maplewood Mall area, what is the current property tax being generated by the various different property types compared to what this new recommendation plan is. How much are you going to be able to collect in property taxes for green space, for instance?
Exactly. You should be, as I understand you, basically, this is what we're collecting now, this is what we propose to collect under this. If this plan were to be fully developed, this is what we would collect. And the people should see the difference on that.
Right.
And also the part of the analysis should be, how does that affect current property tax owners or current property tax payers? Is this going to raise it? Is it going to lower it? Assuming everything else stays the same.
Well, next up, we're going to now switch gears in that we are going to now move to talking about the Rush Line Bus Rapid Transit. Now, we have been reporting on this quite extensively over this past month, especially since a number of our reporters went to Richmond, Virginia, to follow the Advisory Commission for the Rush Line and the Community Advisory Committee for the Rush Line. We followed them over there to Richmond, Virginia, to see what all of the hullabaloo was about and whether or not the Richmond, Virginia BRT Bus Rapid Transit is similar or dissimilar to that being proposed to go up and down the Bruce Vento Trail, the Rush Line, the Purple Line, as some people are going to be calling it in the future. And so we want to continue this discussion because we've gone to another meeting and we've got some film footage from that. But before we do that, for some of our viewers, you may have missed the previous reports and you're thinking to yourself, well, what does the bus rapid transit route look like in Richmond, Virginia? Well, that's certainly an honest question to ask. That should be the first question that all of the committee members should have asked, that all the Ramsey County Board members should ask, that the Maplewood City Council should ask, that the White Bear Lake Council should ask, and that the St. Paul Council should ask. Anybody who's got anything to do with the Rush Line should be asking this question. So what does the BRT route in Richmond, Virginia actually look like? Well, we've got film footage for you so you can see. So this is the bird's eye view of the route that the Richmond, Virginia BRT goes down. This is Broad Street. So it's very similar to University Avenue. Now, for those of you that have been on the Bruce Vento Trail, does this look like the Bruce Vento Trail to you? Now, this is from the other side, looking in the other direction, down Broad Street. And you can see all of the high-rises, the office buildings, the commercial buildings. It's a major thoroughfare through all of Richmond, Virginia. And it is the main drag and their BRT, the Pulse. It's been in operation for about a year. And they, of course, claim that their ridership has doubled over what the projections were. But when you dig into the statistics a little bit more deeply, much of the reason that their ridership has doubled over their initial projections are because, well, the first a week or two that it was first put online, everybody got to ride for free. That will certainly jack up your rider statistics. They also have a program, a pilot program with the university, which is right on this line. It's the Virginia Commonwealth University. It includes a medical school. The campus has like 30,000 students on it, and it is served by this BRT. Well, I think if you put a BRT route right through the middle of a university campus, that's also going to help with your ridership. And I'm going to be asking Mr. Waters here if he can think of any state universities along the Bruce Vento Trail or along the Rush Line, although I think our viewers probably can think about what that answer might be.
Well, there's the University of Maplewood. Oh, wait, that hasn't built yet. That's somewhere in there. That's probably in the Gladstone area somewhere.
The old elementary school.
Yes, exactly, which is about half a mile to the east of the Bruce Vento Trail. But then you do have Weaver Elementary that would be on the trail as well.
Yeah.
So you never know. You may have students, that.
That's right. So you see, the point is this, is that while, yes, Richmond, Virginia has a BRT, and yes, it's got a dedicated lane on the roadway, and it is parallel to sidewalks. There's not a lot of other real world
Amenities?
similarities
Right.
to this whole project.
One of the questions I had asked one of the moderators that went to Richmond, Virginia, I asked what kind of economic development took place along this BRT line. What was the economic development before they put the line in, and what was being developed as the line was being constructed, and what kind of economic development is there today? And basically, the only question I really got, other than what'd you say, Virginia Commonwealth University. Mostly restaurants. That's it. I mean, restaurants are a good part of your ecosystem. I understand that, but it's like the only thing that really can foster people on a regular basis is Virginia Commonwealth University, and that's, you know, as the students or, you know, medical students and so forth. I think you said the medical school was there. So yeah, you're going to have medical students, but eventually they get cars, and, you know, are not relying on that line so much. But I'm real curious, what kind of businesses were there? I mean, obviously you're not going to have manufacturing, but what kind of, you know, office workers or, you know, are based on this line
Right.
that can feed it on a regular basis?
And from what we could tell, because we drove the route, which maybe I should show what the route looks like so that our viewers can see the route. So let's take a look at clip number 19.5. And this gives you then the street view of following along with the bus rapid transit, the Pulse. And there we are, we're just on a regular street like University Avenue. And you can see the types of storefronts along the street. And we too did notice that there were quite a few restaurants as you were closer to the university. But as you got further away from the university, it was actually hard to find a restaurant to stop at, because we actually were looking for a restaurant a little further out to stop at, and it was difficult.
So really, this development is more driven because of the school,
That's
not because
correct.
of the route.
That's correct. And on Friday nights and Saturday nights, we saw an uptick in the ridership because people were taking it from the north end, where they could park their cars at the strip mall and then get on the Pulse and then go downtown closer to the university where all of the restaurants and some of the nightlife was. So certainly there is that aspect of it, but again, do we have that along the Rush line? Do we have that in Maplewood, where people are going to be taking it from White Bear Lake and say, yeah, I'm going to head on down to Gladstone for a nightcap?
Yeah, you never know. Yeah.
So it was very enlightening to be able to be there to see this, and this pilot program that I understand that they have in place with the Virginia Commonwealth University is that the students pay as part of their tuition and their fees a fee that enables them to ride the Pulse, the bus rapid transit. So you have built-in riders that they've built into the system. So this is part of the reason I believe that the increase in ridership has exceeded their projections, because they have built this in. Certainly there's the question then that the students who have to pay this fee, whether or not if they can opt out of it. Generally speaking, from my experience with other university fees, students cannot opt out of fees that they don't want to pay, that everybody has to pay them whether you want to or not. And then how are they paying for this? Is this coming out of their student loan money?
More than likely.
In which case then that means then you're saddling extra debt onto these students who then already have enough debt as it is, and they're carrying the debt of public transportation for the government.
Well, it's not only, you know, that they have to pay these fees, then of course they probably have to buy a bus card to ride this bus route. So it's like you're paying double. It's usually how most of these things work.
Right.
But yeah, you know, that's easier.
So anyway, but there is sort of the background of that. So recently, Victoria Reinhardt, commissioner to the Ramsey County Board, who serves the city of Maplewood and White Bear Lake, she was at the Maplewood City Council meeting, and she gave them an update on the Rush line. And there's so many different things that she could have given an update on, but this is what she chose to talk about. Let's take a look.
Rush line. In 2017, the cities along the line approved the locally preferred alternative as bus rapid transit alongside Phelan Boulevard, the Vento Trail, and Highway 61. And I, again, say over and over again, we will have a trail and this bus rapid transit will coexist. So that moved us into the environmental analysis phase, and that takes 2 years. This phase will involve the station area planning and include many more community engagement meetings, including stationary planning groups and more public hearings. After the environmental considerations and mitigation efforts are more defined, the project will come back to the City Council for a resolution of support before it moves forward to the next phase, which is project development.
So we learned a couple things out of all of that. One is that it's moving along, and it is, well, moving along.
Yes.
And that the plans have to come before the council one last time for a final rubber stamp approval. Now, that's why they need to make sure that they have predictability on the Maplewood City Council, that they had to extend their terms an extra year, because we really should have had an election in Maplewood this fall, just a few days ago. We should have. But the City Council decided that they were going to extend their terms by an extra year. That's why we have an election next year. Well, then, of course, now this whole next free year that they have is going to be set aside with trying to get awards and all these other various things so they can put them on their campaign cards, so they can ensure they get reelected, so that when the time comes and Victoria Reinhardt needs their rubber stamp, she can count on a rubber stamp. Isn't that the way it goes?
Yes, it does. It does. The term that they're now using is yes, man.
Yeah. So we went to the recent meeting of October 30th, 2019 of the Community Advisory Committee to the Rush Line. And both Mr. Waters and myself, we were there. And we have a lot of film footage, and we're only going to be able to touch the iceberg of it today. But we're going to get started. So that way you'll at least have an understanding of this Community Advisory Committee. They are members from St. Paul, Maplewood, Vadnais Heights, White Bear Lake, and they are there to represent the residents of their respective communities. Sometimes, from what I could tell, sometimes the questions were good questions, and I think they were probably questions people in their respective communities might be asking. Some of the questions were just to find out extra information, but then when they got the information that was just sort of general, then they stopped at that answer and said, okay, that sounds good. And I would like to think that community representatives would be more inquisitive or digging more in depth with the answers that they get in order to truly represent their communities. Well, let's take a look at our first clip.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Community Advisory Committee meeting. We haven't met here for a couple months. I forget what the date was, but I'm Bob Morse, and I am a co-chair along with Alicia. So we're going to be starting together on that stuff. I wanted to mention on the agenda, we're going to go right into the agenda. So I know it says icebreaker, we're probably not going to do that, but I want to mention that we've got a few things to talk about here and just get things kind of rolling on what we're doing. So what we're going to ask, and just remind you that the public is welcome. They're always welcome to come out. But any comments or questions or anything we have is restricted to the committee members at this time. So we really appreciate that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tunisia to start with the intros.
Alrighty, so thank you again for coming out this evening and joining us as we give the update. So I would like to just go around to see who's all in the room, including those who are representing the public. If you could just state your name, who you're representing, and also where you're from. So, Tunisia Sylvester, community member, community advisory co-chair, as well as the resident of St. Paul.
And we want to start with that?
Oh, sure.
Jim Gerson.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Jim Gerson, I'm with SREP Consulting Group. I'm part of the consulting team working on the Rushline project.
Andy Gitzloff with Ramsey County, project manager for the Rushline project.
My name is Tom Harrington. I'm with Kimley Horn. I'm on the design consulting team for Ramsey County. Maggie Jones with MnDOT Cultural Resources.
Oh, me. I'm Joe Waters, I'm a community member. I'm also opinion writer with Put Your Hands Together Production. This is the first meeting I've been to, so I wanted to get a little bit more information.
Thank you for coming.
Welcome.
Cindy Whiteford, I'm a resident of Lower Town, I represent Lower Town Creek Project.
I'm Mark Bradley, and I'm a citizen here in Maplewood, and I'd like to know what the extent of damage is going to be to the neighborhoods here, and the cost, who's going to be picking it up, because that's a big issue, since Maplewood is really very, very poor right now.
Okay, so, we'll try to answer your question at the end of this, but can we keep going on? Sorry,
Yes, hi, I'm Diana Longry. I'm the Executive Director of Put Your Hands Together Productions, a local media group. I'm also an attorney. I live in Maplewood, and I'm very interested in the topic.
Hey, I'm Brent Peterson. I am part of the Community Advisory Committee as well, and I'm a resident of St. Paul.
My name is Darren. I'm part of the Community Advisory Committee. I live in Maplewood. And this is my daughter, Allie, or Alexandria. Hi, Allie.
I'm Alicia Valenti. I'm also part of the Rush Line BRT project staff.
Frank Alarcon with Ramsey County, part of the Rush Line project staff.
I'm Cassie Fitzgerald with Ramsey County, also with the Rush Line project staff.
I'm Samantha Crosby with the Community Advisory Committee, and I'm a resident of the city of Maplewood.
I'm Mark Lynch. I'm also Community Advisory Committee, and I am a resident of White Bear Lake.
My name is Joe Petschauer, just a citizen, and I live in White Bear Lake as well.
I'm John O'Phelan. I'm on the the Community Advisory Committee, and I'm also a resident of Maplewood.
1761.
I'm Tree Sonic, I'm a member of the committee, and I live in Maplewood, about a stone's throw from here.
Zach Mensinger, committee member representing St. Paul.
Eric Sada on the committee, live on the east side of St. Paul.
I should get myself an extra set too, huh? So, Bob Morris, I'm a resident of the city of Vadnais Heights. I'm also a council member within there, and I work in White Bear Lake as a commission maker.
You know, just one quick comment. I found it kind of interesting. The one woman that introduced herself, she kind of had blonde hair and a red sweater on. Early before this meeting got started, she kind of approached our cameraman and said, you know, why are you here? And then stood in front of the camera with her back turned to the cameraman, asking questions as to why the camera was here at an open public forum. And you just heard the gentleman that opened up the meeting saying the public is always welcome. So it's like, you know, what were you afraid of from Put Your Hands Together Media? You know, we're there just to cover some activity that are going to affect the citizens of Maplewood.
Exactly. And it was, I thought, ironic that this is the Citizen Advisory Committee, and the public is welcome, as you indicated. However, there's no place on the agenda to hear comments from the public.
Exactly.
So the public is free to come and listen, and
that's about it.
That's it. Well, let's take a look at our next clip where somebody does raise the question about the camera.
So some of this filming, is that part of Ramsey County, or is it part of Rush Line, or is it part of you guys?
Yes, it's part of our media.
Okay.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
So cool. I would love to know a little bit more about that before the meeting gets started, just because I would like to know.
Well, Ramsey County refuses to film the meetings. They do not have transparency as a core value. So.
Well, I can answer some questions for you. Put Your Hands Together Productions is a local media group. We have been in production for under various names for over 15 years. We have viewership of probably somewhere close to 10,000 people in the metro area. And there's many different ways that you can get our news. We do produce 3 news programs a week. And we go out into the community, we do get film footage, and then we put it on our news program so that people are aware of what's going on in various community meetings that maybe they didn't have the opportunity of going to.
Okay. So is it like online or is it on like cable news? Or?
On both, yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes, it is.
Cool.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Thank you for asking. That's good.
Now, we're no different than what Lily News did when they sent a reporter out there and they're using their laptop to report on the news. We have nothing to hide. I heard somebody say, I didn't catch it at the meeting, but I heard someone in the video basically saying, well, we don't have the budget to film it. Well, you have the budget to film it, you've made a conscious decision not to film.
Certainly, they have it in their budget that they can all go on a junket to Richmond, Virginia, and a camera guy at their meetings would be substantially less than bringing 35 people out to Richmond, Virginia, plane fare, hotel at the
dinner.
Hilton, meals.
So we're
Yeah.
talking all together $750 per person times 35. Well, you do the math, and it's like, oh, you don't have money. You don't have you don't have $500 to film an advisory committee meeting, but yet you've got plenty of money to spend on a junket for 3 or 4 days.
Yes, well, that's why we're here, so that way you can hear what's going on in the community. So let's take a look at our next clip.
Case, the environmental assessment continues to be in production. So at this point, as we've laid out in previous meetings, the environmental assessment is an analysis of the potential environmental impacts of the project, and it has these different chapters that are listed here. And at this point in the process, the technical analysis for those four topics that are within the bracket has been completed, and a report has been written summarizing those. All the cities and MnDOT and Metro Transit's technical staff has reviewed those. And then the 6 remaining chapters are still under production, and over the next 6 months to a year or so, those reports are going to be developed and reviewed by our partners. And of course, all the information from these reports will feed into the environmental assessment. So we brought some copies of the Gold Lines environmental assessment.
2 things about that clip. First of all, we have reported on that environmental assessment months and months and months ago, and yet this is the first time that this Community Advisory Commission is being given a report on it. That's because their last meeting was 3 months ago. How much community advising can be done if your community advisory group only meets once every 3 months? They have only enough time to hear what is being spoon-fed to them. They don't have a time to deliberate at all.
Of course not,
And what was also fascinating is that they didn't bring enough of the Gold Line environmental assessment packets so that everybody would be able to look at their own. And keep in mind, they only had the time to look at them during the 2-hour meeting, because at the end of the 2-hour meeting, they were all collected back up again. Nobody got to go home with one. They collected them all.
Yeah, actually sit down and analyze it and formulate your questions.
Right. And that would have been something that could have been done if they were meeting once a month to say, okay, let's take this out, let's analyze it, rather than just to say, well, if you got an interest in it, you can, flip through the pages and it'll give you an idea of what's going on. That's basically what he said.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say anything other than that. Just this will give you an idea what's going on, a flavor of it. We're on to the next topic because we have an agenda to fill in 2 hours and nothing more, nothing less. That's it. That's it. Well, let's continue with our next clip.
Engineering. So Alicia's going to hand out a few copies of the Gold Mines environmental assessment just for you to leaf through to get a sense of what an EA is for a BRC project. And if anything looks interesting, feel free to ask. So that's environmental public engagement.
And there was no public engagement on that environmental assessment, because I did not get a copy of it or was able to see a copy of it myself. Plus the fact, like you said, it was picked up before the meeting was over with.
Yes. And it was very clear that he said, this will just give you a sense of it. Well, what good is that? These people are supposed to be community advisory members, giving advice.
Right.
And what can they give advice on if they haven't really been given an opportunity to delve into anything?
Exactly.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at our next clip. We have only time for one last clip.
We've done some targeted engagement at Harvest Park, and I'll talk more about Harvest Park momentarily. That's in Maplewood. We've also been engaging employers in the St. Paul portion of the route. So some of our healthcare employers along the Phelan corridor, as well as some of our state departments that are just kind of outside of downtown near the Olive and Cayuga stations. So there's like the Department of Natural Resources and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency have a ton of employees within a short walk of the rush line. We've also done a bunch of one-on-one meetings with Phelan Boulevard businesses that might see some temporary construction impacts while the rush line is getting built 5 to 7 years from now. So we just had kind of initial conversations with them to let them know the project is coming. There might be some impacts to your business. Most of those impacts will be temporary. Those meetings went pretty well. I think a lot of employers are pleased that there's going to be better transit, which means better access for employees. It'll make it easier to recruit and retain workers.
The governmental the employers that they talked to all sounded to me to be governmental employers. Well, of course they're going to be happy that there's going to be a government-sponsored project going on. Why wouldn't they be happy with that? And I find it curious that they think that this BRT is going to give them better service for their employees so they can retain them and all, because the bus service isn't sufficient. Well, if the bus service isn't sufficient, how is the BRT going to be sufficient? Because the BRT, the bus rapid transit, is simply a bus that's more expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because as I sit here and I kind of look at this and I'm going like, what's going to happen to the existing bus service already that served the Department of Natural Resources on Lafayette Boulevard, the county jail that's or in the sheriff's office that's on Lafayette Boulevard, and so forth. I mean, most of this stuff is at the end of the line. It's not at the beginning of the line. It's not throughout the line. It's mostly on the end of the line, which would be kind of what I consider the southwest corridor of this line. Mm-hmm. So, how is that truly going to serve businesses along the Phelan corridor?
And have they really done an analysis to understand if the majority or a large portion of the people working at those facilities are actually from Maplewood, from White Bear Lake? What if they're from Wisconsin?
What if they're from the West Metro?
That's right. What if they're coming from Egan? And they're not on the rush line at all?
Exactly. How's that going to skew everything? Yeah.
Well, there's more questions than there are answers. Mr. Waters, I want to thank you for being on the program today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
And viewers, thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.